Welcome to Dark Matter Radio, the new format on Live 365. Wherever you may be in this beautiful world, whether you're in Canada, the United States, Mexico, somewhere down there in Africa, South America, Australia. Of course, we have some listeners over there in Europe, which is Britain. We have some in Germany. And we have a lot of people who are coming over from Blog Talk Radio. And we are welcoming you here on Live 365, Dark Matter Amerindian Radio. Tonight, we have a special program. I'm going to call it a Heroes of Valor, because there comes every so often an hour being of life, a person that comes by to be able to share and impart to us information that is so important that you may not hear it again for another 1,000 years. This person, Jameel Shamsid Deen, don't call my dummy no dummy. And the show tonight is called The Day of Independence. Now I want you to think about that, the Day of Independence. Now, we have a lot of independence going on in terms of, we have the Civil War. We have here in the United States, we have 1776, which is the Revolutionary War, which was pretty much a large independent movement from quote-unquote European rule. We also have this thing called the Magna Carta. A lot of people bring that up and say, oh, this is independence. But who was it independence for? If a certain group of people or a certain race of people actually declared their independence sometime in the late 1800s. I'm going to play a prelude for you. And it's going to be in his own voice. And we're going to hear from the master himself.
Open mind is the key to enlightenment and wisdom. A backward leap into the past. Oh, say, beloved, I hope you enjoy the journey you're about to take with me and have the intestinal fortitude to see it through from beginning to end. Because there is so much information contained within my writing, I tried not to overwhelm you on any particular topic because they all reference the major subject within these pages. I actually tried to drop breadcrumbs throughout that if you had any interest in knowing who you are, there is a reference point to start. I found over the years that people who have this information, unfortunately, are making a business out of helping or not helping you to become cognitive of who you are. This information has been put together to tell the story of those people labeled Indian, Negro, Black, Colored, and now so-called African American, to share with you real information that has been hidden in plain sight. I am going to write as if I'm talking to you face to face from a common sense approach and not in the matrix world I earn my living for you to feel me. I have to start with this important disclaimer. If you do not agree with what I've written within these pages, research it and come and have a sit down with me to discuss what I've missed in the primary sources, i.e. old books, periodicals, journals that were written before 1850, the true Reconstruction period, that tells a different story from what I present here within. We all have been lied to through a revisionist account of history to erase the real people of this land. If you do not comprehend that as long as our people do not claim their right position on this land, the fuckery will continue. As a subject class of people, the color of law gives rise to more and more attacks against your being, because the majority of immigrants living on this land were taught a false narrative that you and your kind were stolen from Africa and enslaved in this country. This belief keeps you from receiving life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness outlined within the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Remember that a well-dressed lie will never stop the naked truth from being seen. Hopefully you'll question by the end of your journey with me, how is it that after the 13th Amendment and the Emancipation Proclamation, which granted freedom to slaves, people of color, i.e. Indians, Negroes, Blacks, and Coloreds, were still subject to more discriminatory laws and practices, to include black codes and Jim Crow, which continue to suppress black participation in a free society well after slavery was abolished. I truly believe in the concept Please do not be angry if the truth I write contradicts the bullshit you've been taught.
What is going on, Jeff?
And there you have it. There is Jameel E.A. Shamsid Deen. Don't call my dummy no dummy. And how are you tonight, Jameel? How are you doing tonight, Shadow?
Greetings and new mahalo, brother.
Mahalo.
Believe me, the way my name Shamsid Deen is phonetically written, the way it should be said. I know growing up in the military, people would ask, how do you pronounce it? I'd say Stefanowski, because people could see Stefanowski and actually phonetically say it. So I saw you stumble on that, so that was awesome.
My apologies for that. As many times as I say it, you know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
Well, this has been a day long coming because I've been trying to get you on to do a show on your book. Don't call my dummy no dummy for quite some time. The book actually was written a couple of years ago. What year did the book actually come out?
2019 is when I put it in for publishing it. It dropped January the 2nd or 3rd of 2020.
Okay. So your book's been out for 5 years now. And it's a heck of a book, I have to tell you that. And I'm telling everybody, you gotta get on. Now, where can you get the book, first of all?
The book is being sold on Amazon. I have a second book that dropped last year. I Told You, Don't Call My Dummy No Dummy. Now, the Don't Call My Dummy No Dummy is really an important phrase to me because it was something that my grandmother used to say all the time. And as a kid, I was always wondering, why does she say it? Why does she say it? And I was in my teens, my early teens, when it finally cleared and clicked in my head what was meant. So she would say, someone would tell a story, and she'd say, don't call my dummy no dummy. And after hearing it, and when it finally clicked, I'm like, oh, okay, I love that. That's perfect. So it was something that just stuck with me.
That is pretty awesome. I tell you, if it wasn't for our grandparents, now they didn't speak much about their past, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But if it was for our grandparents, most people, grandparents, always told them that they were American Indians, and you never heard any. And I'm talking about now, people wherever you are. I'm talking about the so-called Black American, African American. Again, African American came in. I think it was 1989 when they were created. 88.
Jesse and his messiness.
Well, up until then, you never heard really too much about that. You heard more of the term Negro, which was another reframing, reclassification, right? And but they always said we're Indian. Now,
yes.
Whether you're a Mohican, Cherokee, and those are some of the popular ones. There were a lot of different types of Indians, but mainly they would say that we're American Indian, and they were proud of their heritage. Not one time did anybody in my family ever say we're African. I don't know. Have you ever heard anything like that in your family?
Not in my family, no. I never grew up with it. And I grew up in the 60s. I was born in the early 60s. And Jim Crow was still alive when I was born. And never heard anything to that effect, ever. But there's the important part of that. If you go back and you look at our history, most of us don't read. Most of us from 88 through 2000 were fighting what was institutionally put into our world, a drug war. We were institutionally given drugs to send us to jail and to death. That's literally what was happening through the 90s. Crack epidemic. Mm-hmm. And most people don't realize that we lost so many of the important things that give us yesterday during that time. because of all the mayhem that occurred in our society because of that.
Now, when you really begin to start taking a look at who's controlling society, when did you start to realize something was amiss in terms of heritage-wise? When did you really want to start looking into all of these different things in terms of racial classification?
Well, I always knew that we were Indian. We were told that as kids. That was never a question. But it didn't become important until my brother transitioned in 2001.
My condolences for that, yeah.
And that's when my life changed, because the person that I grew up with, you know, we were chasing that American dream. We were doing things the way the system had designed it for us to do it, was no longer there. I didn't have that person to bounce back on. And joining the organizations that I did, the church groups, the things that I belonged to, I had to step back and say, wait a minute, something's wrong here. And so I started going inside and saying, who are you for real? And that's where my journey to self-actualization really started.
And where did it take you?
So initially, it was trying to talk to whatever family members I had left, right, that hadn't transitioned. And so that became an important part, asking about the old, because when we were kids, I don't know about you, but I know me, when I was a kid and I would ask questions and they'd tell me, child, stay in your place.
Yep.
Stay in your place. That ain't none of your business. Stay in your place.
Direct quotes from elders.
So,
and you better listen to it.
And you did listen.
Yep.
You did listen. Ain't none of your business. That's none of you. And so, 80s, I joined the military. I left the country, did that, and started that journey. So I didn't get back into the family thing until I came back off of my active duty tours. And once I got back in, got to school, the question of who are you really came into play after I did the janaza prayer for my brother and put him in the ground, because I was by myself and I didn't want to be at the mosque. I didn't want to be in any club. I didn't want to be around anyone. I just wanted to figure out, why am I and who am I in this world as a being?
Now, there's a lot of people who go through that stage and they do join the church. And you just said you didn't want to be in any of those things. At any point, did you get into the church? Did you get into the mosque or Hebrewites and Israel Hebrewites and all that other type stuff?
So as you pronounce my name, Jameel Shamsid Deen, I am Muslim. I am a non-practicing Muslim. I will always be Muslim. I will always believe in the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no matter what. I just walked away from the man part, the religion, because things happened that I walked away from man and what he controlled us with through words. In 1993, I made my Hajj. I was a devout Muslim, practicing the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But after I did my janazah, something in me changed. And doing that janazah prayer for my brother, who we shared up until that time, always together, changed me as a person.
Now, for our audience, could you explain just a little bit about the janazah prayer?
The janazah prayer is the last prayer, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide our loved one. So that's literally what it is.
Okay. Now.
And so.
Uh huh.
No, I said so. That changed me as a person, and even my children, my elder children, told me once my brother transitioned, I changed as a person. So yeah, it made me more looking right in front of me and inside of me.
So during this time, you began to sort of get more inwardly in terms of who you are as a being.
Yes, completely.
Now, did the Muslims? Now, there's two different Muslims. People don't realize that the Farrakhan Muslims, or the Muslims of the United States, and I guess there's many different types of sects of Muslims when you really talk about it. But I'm just going to talk about the Middle East. The ones that are outside the United States and practicing quote unquote true Islamic religion, and the one that was more politically motivated, which was the one that Louis Farrakhan. Yeah, Fruit of Islam. So
So with that, yes, as a youth, I did belong to the Fruit. And when I was 16 years old, because of the school I was going to, I actually met a Muslim from another country who was going to school here in the United States, and I was able to differentiate the difference between American Islam and Islam from a worldview. And at the age of 16, I took Shahada and started moving in a different direction, and that's what allowed me to actually join the military and go see the world.
Interesting. I mean, when I was about 16, 17 years old, and my sister was a Muslim. She was just I think she was a Sunni Muslim, and there was a teacher there that actually really taught me a lot about the Muslim faith and what was going on with the Christian faith, what it was all about. But it's again, these are learning tools that help you bring you to a point as to where you're able to learn how to identify, study, and look at many different aspects of religion.
Yes, that is truly it. And as I said in the beginning, I am always going to be a Muslim because I submit to the will of God.
It's funny because he said no matter if you're a Christian or you're Israeli or whatever, he said, if you submit to the will of God, you are a Muslim.
Period.
And now with the hardcore people, I mean, a lot of people will say, well, if you're Muslim, you can't be this, you can't be that. But understanding the word Muslim just means that you submit. You submit to a higher authority. You submit to the being that's within you. You submit to God.
Yes.
That's basically what that is. And when it came down to you actually doing the study for the book, how did that come about? Your first book, anyway. Don't Call My Dummy No Dummy.
So that's an interesting story. So being in the military, I made a lot of bad decisions. Good decisions long term because I had some beautiful children. Mm-hmm. But being in the military, being gone a lot, relationships and me weren't the most solid. And through that, I ended up with children. And I didn't have direct input in there growing up, and I would hear things from them that would make me say, "Whoa, you don't know me. I'm your dad. This is crazy. I pay X amount of dollars a month. I see you every now and then, but you don't know me as a person." So I decided, I'm going to write a memoir. So the day that I transition off of this plane of existence, you'll know exactly who your father was, and that's what started it. The fortunate part is, as I completed this memoir, and I was getting people to help me. I have a couple PhD friends who were instrumental in giving me proof and subject injects that they think I should talk about as I was writing through. We found that the book, in a 9-inch by 6 inch, was 570 pages. Mm-hmm. Right? And this is why the book today is an 11 by 8, because people wouldn't even try to attempt a book that thick. So I made it a coffee table book, because what I found in the way I wrote it, if a person does their genealogy and takes all of my genealogy and everything that I wrote about myself out and inject their information. This is their story, because the information is about history that should be taught, that should be known by all beings that live in America that are of that copper color hue.
So the book is a memoir for your children to be able to review the history not only of themselves but of their being.
Exactly. And the suggestion, which is really the funniest part, the suggestion from one of my PhD buds was, this can go for everyone, not just your children. And so that's where the rewrite came in, to structure it that I kept the most informative pieces that was not directed at me as a person, but information that people should know in that track, keep going in that direction. And hopefully someone who read the book and did their genealogy, they can insert their own information and the book applies to them, because this is the what happened here in America, period.
And there is in this book, don't call my dummy no dummy, in this book there's a lot of what happens. I'm telling you, there's a lot of what happens. I mean, because I do a lot of studying myself, and, writing all the stuff, do all the speeches and stuff. And then when, you collect a lot of information, and then as they began to start sanitizing the internet, a lot of the information gets missing. So one of the things, and we'll have a more deeper conversation about this one, but one of the things that I had researched, and I'm telling people that a certain group of people, right, which what we call now Native Americans, and we'll get into that definition, but a certain group didn't get here. I'm looking, because I've been to a whole bunch of a lot of historical places and stuff like that, and from what I was finding was that they didn't really arrive here until sometime in the 1800s. And
1860s.
1860. Now, I was giving them the benefit of the doubt and said 1800 until I read your book, and it actually came down. Could you just, and again, when we say Native Americans first apply to the Europeans that were born in America. Is that not right?
That is correct. That was the Native movement that was happening in America. So you had the colonials come in, they had children, they became natives. And that was more important, that nativism was more important because immigrants were still coming in. And as long as immigrants were still coming in, there were people, classic people, who wanted, I was here first, I'm native, this is mine, you can't just take our stuff. And that's where that came from.
And we get a definition in the 1828 Webster Dictionary, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know offhand what that definition actually says?
Of a native, no. I wrote it in the book, and I don't know what page that I have it on, but there is a big difference between a native and an American Indian, and which is really interesting. I've had people say to me over and over through the years, so you're Native American. I say, no, I'm not. I'm American Indian. None of my documentation in the military stopped saying American Indian, ever. People said, no, it's no longer American Indian. It's Native American. No, it isn't. I'm an American Indian. There's a difference. You, my friend, are Native American because you're second generation, third generation immigrant to my country. And that was how I stood.
And we're not really talking about what you call the Native Americans on the reservations. You're actually talking about the Europeans that were brought here.
Exactly.
Right? So I want people around the world to understand here that here in the Americas, what we're doing is that we're not redefining history. We're just making sure history is being told in the right way, and that's why this book is so important. because it explains to you what actually a Native American is, and when the other people that are now called Native Americans, when I guess they're Mongolians, what you said, the Mongols, what would you call them?
I wouldn't call it. I honestly wouldn't call it Mongolian. I would say the Asian phenotypical physiognomy, because there were Philippines,
Okay.
there were Koreans, there were Japanese that today have proven ancestry to those places are Native Americans living and enjoying the American dream.
So, and the term Native American didn't really become popular until I believe the 60s, right?
No, it was the 70s.
70s.
It was the 70s. It was after, what is this young man's name? I can't think of his name. He started the AIM movement in the 70s. So there's a two-part to this. Native American stands tall today because they don't want to be American Indian. Why? Because American Indians went into slavery. They don't want that blemish. It is proven that 2.5 to 5.5 American Indians went into slavery in the Americas. That's important. We are the only people that went into slavery that have been stripped of our Indian title and called Negro, Black, and Colored. So, not wanting to be an American Indian is what this is about today. They want to be Native American. Well, you are, and I'm not going to take that from you, but you're different people. In the book, I bring it out. In November of 1990, Congress passed the American Indian Heritage Month. So every month there was American Indian Heritage Month for the month of November. In November of 2013, President Obama made the Native American Heritage Week by proclamation. It didn't go up in front of Congress. So you have two competing things that they're trying to overlap. The Native American Heritage Week on top of the American Indian Heritage Month. They are separate things. One was by Congress, one was by proclamation. And we hear it all the time. The Emancipation Proclamation was just a writ.
Yep.
It didn't mean anything.
Yep.
For real. So President Obama's proclamation was the same thing. It was a writ. Okay, you put them on the docket now. They're there. But it does not wipe out the month of November as American Indian Heritage Month. That was declared by Congress. So there's several things that tie this all together. From 1968, now I'll just go back just a little bit, and we'll move on to independence. That's something I definitely want to talk about. So on April the 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King was shot here in America, right? That day, he went to the hospital. He died in the hospital. Dr. Pepper, he wrote a book on it. I think you guys should get that books, or his books, because those books that he speak about is about the King assassination and the government cover-up and how he didn't die on the balcony. He died in the hospital from being suffocated. But that being said... Well,
Jesse Jackson tells a different story.
Yeah. Lies be... They said, tell a lie long enough and people will believe it, right?
There's blood all over my shirt.
And so when that happened, what was transpiring, and people don't understand it, you can look it up, you just look for the images of this time period. America was burning from coast to coast. The president at the time, LBJ, and the Congress and the people, they were afraid So they had to do something. What was King fighting for? He was fighting for fair housing and job opportunities for people of color, right?
Yep.
That's what that was all about. But that cost him his life. In that span of 7 days, from the 4th to the 11th, they signed Public Law 9284. Public Law 9284 is nothing but the Civil Rights Act. Please read it, because Article 2 of Public Law 9284 states rights of the Indian. LBJ wasn't stupid. He knew who he's dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
He knew who he was giving these fair housing and opportunities for fair employment to. Those people that we call or are labeled Negro, Black, and Colored, he called them Indian. And that's the saddest part, because most people don't know it. But every other country that has come here has been able to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness off the 1968 Civil Rights Act. Everyone. Because believe me, believe it or not, the big immigration of people of Asian persuasion didn't come into America until after that period. They were here, but they weren't here in the millions like they are today. And they enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness like everyone else off the blood of the people that have been literally, kept from it through the laws, or I'll call them statutes and codes that they have created to keep us at the bottom rung of our society.
So just to recap that, the Civil Rights Act is actually for American Indians, not for Native Americans.
Nope. It's written, Title II, Rights of the Indians.
And at that point, the Negroes, which were reclassified, they were reclassified from a designation of what they were known as, which was American Indians.
Mm-hmm.
Then reclassified into Negroes and assumed them called Black. And then in 1988, 87, 88 came African American.
Exactly.
But in the 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, we had Native nations popping up all over the place because of what they were doing with the casinos. But that was mainly because of the Italians, who were classifying themselves as Native Americans. Am I correct on that one?
Yes, you are. There's a lot of missing pieces here. So the push for the reservational casinos came later, 70s and forward. Right? During the 50s, remember, 40s, 50s, 60s was the gang, it was the gangland time. So, those dons and things, they were doing their things, right?
Yep. Yep.
So that's what was going on during that time. Then corruption being corruption, laws being written, tax evasion and things of that nature, that slowed down. They found another way to introduce gambling through reservational opportunities. And more people started swinging to their native side.
Because they were able to...
corruption.
Yeah, because they're able to take advantage of some of the laws that were written in to make sure that quote-unquote Native Americans were able to get government grants.
Yep, and subsidies, yes, sir.
So, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of stuff going on. Don't call my dummy no dummy. There's a lot of stuff going on in this book, which it gets complicated. Normally, for the audience, I wanted to let you know that I usually go chapter by chapter here. We're doing it a little differently because we're really getting into right now when they came, and when they came is what you now call Native Americans who are on the reservations. And then how they proceeded to be able to along with the DOS roles and a few other roles, and how other people began to start buying names off that roles and become Native Americans, and they were quote unquote white Europeans.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
And now that name white is synonymous to a privileged until I believe it was a law, I forgot the date that they had a law where they created white as a race.
I have it in the back of my mind, and I'm sorry. I wish I would have remembered that one because it is new. So and you're close to my age, I believe.
Yep.
And the important piece of the race thing, if you remember, in the 70s, Italians, Irish were not considered white. They weren't considered white when they first got here.
No.
It was until the late 70s, beginning of the 80s that they were considered part of the white race. Again, white status.
Because the white status happened after what you would call Bacon's Rebellion, which happened in the 1620s, 1615, and then by 1625, 1630, they had to come up with a status called white. It wasn't a race at that time, but it was a status called white, so then that way they could begin to start separating the quote-unquote colored people, American Indians, who were being taken advantage of and thrown into prisoner of war status, along with the indentured servants and slaves of whites that were combining their energies and fighting against the crown. And I believe that was Virginia.
Yeah, and a great book for that is a book by Robin DiAngelo. She wrote a book called White Fragility. That's a good book to read.
And that started that started the quote unquote how can I say race baiting separation of the quote unquote colors.
So there's a piece that you're missing here. So still in the 1700s, the world was primarily, a brown of complexion. Benjamin Franklin wrote in 1751 that the majority of the world was swarthy, tawny, black. What we call as white is a small minority worldwide. So the white status wasn't about color at that time. It was separating the lower classes of people in the society of what they had set up far as servitude is. And that's one of the things that we have to remember, because although there was slavery, indenturedness was real, and there were more people of color indentured in America than it was what we call today white. There were white people in slavery. President, what was the joker's name there? Lincoln. President Lincoln said it when he wrote the Emancipation to free both black and white. So both of them were in servitude together. But what feared the North, they talk about that, or I know you've seen that movie, 12 Years a Slave.
Yep.
Right? They were afraid of Southerners, black Southerners at the time, coming up and stealing whites from the North and bringing them down and putting them on the plantations. So
Yep. Say that one more time. Say that. I want you to say that one more time because there's a lot of people who probably just missed what you said.
So the planter class of people in America were people of color, right? There are books out there that prove that there were a lot of plantations that were owned by people of color. And the slavery, indentured, or slave for life concept wasn't just about people of color. Where the problem came in is the people in the North were afraid that the people of the South would come up and steal people and bring white people and bring them down south and put them on them plantations. That's where the push to stop slavery came from, because the fear, as long as it existed, that they're a part of this system, that they could be put into slavery, indentured, or forever, whichever way we do it. This is why there was so many cases in the courts of people that were classified as white getting their freedoms because they said they came from Germany or Ireland or France. These cases exist, and people don't know that.
And you know, and that's why, you know, again, we're getting into we're going into the subject when they declared their independence, which is very significant because up until a certain time, which is, I mean, well into the 1880s, most of the world, and still to today, most of the world was controlled by copper-colored, melanated people.
That's right.
Right? I mean, even into Europe, into the 1880s, they were still being controlled. There was still a lot of controls being wiped out by the copper-colored, by what we now call the white race of the copper-colored race, because he had a big giant genocide that was going on in Europe at the time.
Yep, and this is where World War I came in. So, and I did it for myself to prove it. I went back. Remember, Europe had allegiance, and we're talking about the crowns of Europe, had allegiance to the Ottoman Empire.
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
If you go back, and I put it in the book to show images of aviators from World War I, from the Ottoman Empire, they are copper-colored people. They look like cousins. And it's in the book, purposely. So this was World War I. They were trying to change the dynamic of control. And our past selves, never thought that it would get to this place. And that this is poignant to go into the Wilmington Massacre of 1898. Because the ownership of what we had at that period was the majority black owned. By 1920, we still own 20 million acres of farmland.
Yeah, I mean, even in the 60s, when they were marching, they had placards that they were rising up saying how much farmland that they owned, which was the majority of farmland in the country.
Yep.
And they also owned, people don't realize this, but a lot of copper-colored beings here in the States actually own a lot of the oil wells.
Yep, that is correct.
And
I brought that up. I brought that up also in the book.
And that's down in your neck of the woods. Well, that's down in there was a lot of people in Texas still today trying to reclaim some of the land, aren't they?
Yes, there are. And they're, the system isn't designed for truth. And you have some people who are suffering from that, for researching their family genealogy and what was owed or what was owned by them. has caused the beast to come out in full force in a lot of respects. And I know some families that have paid dearly for just researching the past.
So history's a hell of a thing, because as we're talking right now, I mean, people have to start to realize that this system, this world, is nothing what's portrayed in the movies.
Nothing.
Nothing portrayed in the movies, because they were having a hell of a time. When I say they so saw Caucasian race or white people, and again, white people synonymous of a lot of different color types.
Mm-hmm.
But they were having a hard time. And in your book, you outline the day they call independence, because they were warring. And that's what your second book really gets into. I mean, you mentioned it here in this book about the riots. I don't like calling them riots. This was a war, and a lot of people say slaves, but those of our copper-colored people, our Amerindians, the people that Maricus, they were thrown into prisoners of warship. They were prisoners of war. And this was a serious war that was egged on by other people that look just like us to put these so-called new whites into power. And you mentioned it in your book on page 91 of "Don't Call My Dummy No Dummy," the White Declaration of Independence. When white supremacists, and that's a heavy word, because we're not talking about white racist. We're talking about a system that had been installed, the white supremacy system, overthrew the democratically elected government of Wilmington, North Carolina, and sometimes in history there is a marker that takes place. And could you just discuss this really important marker of the day they declared their independence?
So this happened in 1898 in Wilmington. It was called the Wilmington Massacre. And so what transpired is there was a newspaper article, basically, and the editor, Manley, wrote something that they didn't care for, basically, and it started a problem, and it changed the whole dynamic of the so-called white people. And what happened is they came up in arms against Manley, and they threatened him, and they told him, "We're going to burn you down. We'll give you 24 hours to get out of town."
No, who's Manley now? Who's Manley?
Manley was an editor of the Daily Record, right? That was his newspaper. It was a black newspaper of the time, and there had just been an election. These people were in place, and so the shift came from these agitators that no longer wanted to be under Negro rule, right? They were poor, they were there, they didn't make much of themselves, even if they were first generation, and they felt that they were slighted because these people, these Negroes, Indians, call them whatever you want, had power, had prosperity, had things that they didn't. And so they flipped the switch. They wrote the white man's Declaration of Independence, and which is a trip. When I found that, I was like, oh my God, this is in line with everything that happened here in America. You think about it, these dates are important. Democratic elections, politics, Act of 1871. That's when our Constitution was changed with that act, right? 6 years later, the Ku Klux Klan Act. They had millions of so-called whites that became a part of this Democratic Party. that wanted to thrust fear into the system that was going at that time. That helped to increase the lynchings, the burnings, the drownings, i.e. town drownings. And I talk about that in this book, but I brought it up more in my second book. I told you, Don't Call My Dummy No Dummy, is the why, is the how, of everything took place. The importance is the way the system worked at that period. They were state after state after state. They took on the behaviors of other states. That was the new thing. And so that helped to spread from Carolina all the way up the East Coast, and then moving back west as they moved further. But remember, by 1898, Oklahoma was still Indian territory.
Yeah, so that's what I want to ask you. That's what I want to ask. Now, when we look at history, you're looking at 100% control by white people over black people, and they controlled everything. So when they declared their independence, were there a lot of quote-unquote black people, Aboriginal, copper-colored American Indians running these towns?
Yes. There are a lot of towns that were wiped off the face of the earth. There were a lot of all-black towns that were wiped off. But the towns that exist, that still exist today, how would I say, the change in dynamics of the support from copper-colored people started changing. We got out of politics in the early 1900s because if you look at how we have progressed, remember the Democratic Party is the party of demonstrative things. It's all written over time. And where I was going with that was the Act of 1871, the Ku Klux Klan Act, and all the things that happened in the early 1900s through the Education Act of 1942. All of these institutional changes all came at the hand of democratic reform, right? The socialism at its finest. Let's do everything to give a pot of tea, but we're paying, and this is real talk. We're paying taxes today on so many things because, and we can say our retirement. We use our retirement as an example because Social Security, right, is taxed today because when they first made that Ponzi scheme, what did it do, right? It wasn't for us because we weren't in that system. Once we started getting in that system, there was a big push that they shouldn't receive the same money. So they found a way to take some of that money back from everybody in the whole now. But that's the way our system is. Anything that we get tied into becomes another profit margin for the system that has been set up.
It's unbelievable because in your book, you go on to say that in 1998, white supremacists forever affected the community of Wilmington, North Carolina, by fueling anger and resentment among the white citizens of this formerly affluent brown town that swept throughout the United States of America. After creating a white declaration of independence, the hate group attacked people of color in the media, at the polls, and finally in the streets. Even after they turned Wilmington into a haven for white supremacy or supremacists, though the job wasn't done, white scholars and historians covered up political games played by oust so-called black politicians and blamed the violence on those who suffered from it most, and that's when you begin to start getting into Walter Plecker, just wiping people out. And Walter Plecker was somebody who was
1924. Yeah.
they were running the census.
Mm-hmm.
So this war that was going on culminated in the quote-unquote, what I would call black Europeans, along with now what you would call the white Europeans, trying to wipe out the American Indian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is correct. And that's the sad part of it, because what we don't know, well, it's not know, the information's there, we just don't do the research for whatever reason, right? For whatever reason, we don't do the research. And that's the sad part. But it's been, if you go back in time and you think about what has really transpired in our country, it's hidden. And most people don't know. And I just tried to condense it into one form of delivery, i.e. my book.
Uh-huh.
And I believe I did a good job in capturing, I think, the important pieces for my children, at least, right? That was the most important piece. But anyone who picks up the book now could read it and truly understand where I was trying to go. Because knowledge is power. And that's what people don't understand. You know, it's like from the 90s. So let's go to 1898. 1898, we had South Carolina, Lake City. There was riots. We had Greenwood County, South Carolina. Nuremberg, New York, there were riots. 1900 came around. They had New Orleans riots. These were all race riots. Now, we haven't even got to 1924 when they tried to reclassify. But between 1898 to 1924, when they did the Indian Citizenship Act, there were at least 40 riots on black towns that was supported. These were militia. These were townspeople who fought against. And you're talking about after the so-called white man's independence, to have 40 massacres and riots after that. We're not talking about a what's the word I'm looking for? Uncivilized people. They were supposed to be civilized in nature. This is everything you see in the movies that they portray. They were posh and posh too. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But no, we miss the most important pieces. All of the riots and massacres that were spread upon the people of America. Those labeled Indian, Negro, Black, Colored, now African American. And that's the important message, that writing books like this or telling stories like that are important, because until you look at it for what it really is. I did a graphical map of all the riots and massacres from coast to coast, and it was astounding to see all the way from East Coast to West, the mayhem that was brought about to people only because they were, and somebody else wanted what they had.
Now, in your book, you actually have the full text of their Declaration of Independence. I'm going to read just a little bit of it, and what it says is that we, the undersigned citizens, and I want everybody to understand when you're listening to this, the history that you're told and that you're shown is that they had 100% control of everything within the continental United States, Canada, basically Mexico, and that they were the rulers of the planet. And I just, this is why it's so important to understand what the real history is about, and why Jameel has written this book, Don't Call My Dummy No Dummy, is a must-have. And it goes on to say, we the undersigned citizens of the city of Wilmington and the county of New Hanover, do hereby declare that we will no longer be ruled and will never again be ruled by men of African origin. This coalition we have in part endured because we felt that the consequences of the war of secession were such as to deprive us of fair consideration of many of our countrymen. Now, here they tell you in his book, he points it out in their own words, this is a war. This is a war. And you got to remember, even in the 1920s, as they declared this, they were warring and wiping out, like he said, communities left and right. And, you know, one of the most notable ones, which is, again, happening all over, I would say everywhere in the continental Americas, Black Wall Street, which I believe was in 1929?
Yeah.
1929. 1919. Now, what they did, and the actual story is that they wiped out more than 3,500 people. Threw most of the bodies in a river that was close by. And this is the first time that bombs were actually dropped on the land of the what you call now the United States, ever by U.S. military.
Yes, and so I misspoke. 1919 was the Red Summer, and that's what really was the pivotal part, and I write about that in the book also. But 1921 is when Tulsa happened, and everything that you said is factual. The only thing isn't factual is the death toll. The numbers go, I've heard as much as 5,000 to 7,000 people lost their lives, but they say it's 300. So,
yeah, and again, anytime that they give you a number, because again, before they started wiping out a lot of this history, I read a lot of the original information, a lot of the original reports on what you call microfiche in libraries. You know, people used to go to, and they used to have things written down in the reference section, and that's where I got the number, the lowest number. Lowballing is 3,500, but yeah, I agree with you. You know, the actual number is probably somewhere around 7,000 to 8,000 people because they wiped out just about everybody in a large town. And in that town, how many they had over 600 some odd businesses that were just completely wiped out, right?
Destroyed. They were destroyed. The town was in rubble. And then, if you remember in the 80s, you dropped the bomb on me.
That's right, in Philly. In Philly, that's right. People, I was in shock at that one.
Yeah, that was 1985. That was in Philadelphia. But I brought that up being funny because if you remember, there was the song about it.
Oh.
You dropped the bomb on me, baby. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember that. Wow. I forgot what band made that, but holy cow. I was watching the video of that about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he had airplanes flying all over the place, dropping bombs, and people yelling. That's no joke. Wow. So I want everybody to understand that the history that you've been taught and been told by your churches, Catholic churches, Baptist churches, quote-unquote black churches, African-American churches, even the history you've been taught in your African-American studies. After reading this book, you'll find that there's been a lot of mishaps in terms of telling the truth about history. And they had to. And this is the reason why, you need to know when a certain group of people declared independence, because it was a war and a revolt. They revolted against the people that brought them here, right? Because people don't understand about the 13 quote unquote black colonies, right? They don't understand that, and you brought up the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire, you go into Frederick III, Now, they have pictures of Frederick III, which means that he's the fourth person in the line of that family who was an emperor. And he was standing with who? He was standing with one of the wild men.
Yep.
And who were the wild men? The wild men were the people that they had taken out of the Caucasus Mountains and brought them into Europe and let them live in the wilderness over there as people that they used to do their wars. And they brought a good deal of those people over here to do a lot of their bidding. Because you got to, because at that time, that population was calling the people like Frederick III. They were calling their gods, and they were actually, the whites were actually being called black. People who were void of color, bleached.
Bleak. Yep.
But I tell you gotta go out and get the book. You gotta go out and get the book because it's a history you will not learn anywhere else, and it's undisputed. He has now in the book itself. You also have not only do you have the Declaration, the White Declaration of Independence. I mean, you have the whole entire thing there. So get the book and read it. I'll read it again on one of the shows when we have a little bit more time. But you also have you have a lot of reference material in here.
Yes. The important part is not just make a statement to show it. I'm not speaking from my left pocket. I am bringing you information that exists. One of the most sought after words we hear today is, where's the receipt? Wait, well, you know what? This book is a book of receipts. I'm bringing you the receipts. All you got to do is do a little bit of research, and hopefully the breadcrumbs that I drop will incite you enough to know enough, because individually, we are not going to get our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. We have to collectively come together on the same accord that we are one people that deserves our humanity. That has been taken away from us because they have destroyed our grounds from coast to coast. They have hidden, they have maimed, murdered, tortured, killed in the name of progression, but there was only one people that suffered that, and that is those people labeled Indian, Negro, Black, Colored, and now African American descendants.
And on
that's the important piece.
And on page 78 of your book, Don't Call My Dummy No Dummy, we get the definitions of all of them, and we talked about the definition of an American. A Native American originally applied to the Aboriginals or copper-colored races found here by the Europeans, but now apply to the descendants of Europeans born in America. The name Native American must always exalt pride and patriotism. That's what George Washington had to say. Now, an American, right? An American also in the 1570s, you get a definition. Originally, one of the Aboriginal peoples discovered in Western Hemisphere by Europeans. From the modern Latin Americas, from American, the original sense is now Native Americans, the sense of residents of North America, of European, originally British descent, is from 1765. And then you also have the Indian, which is the definition of an Indian, noun, a general name of any native of the Indies, in the East Indies or West Indies, it is particularly applied to the native of the American continent. Indian as an adjective from India, and this from Indus, the name river of Asia pertaining to either the Indies or West Indies. And remember, what we now call India was called what was it called? Hindustan. Hindustan, right? During this time of all these definitions that were out. So they weren't called Indians back then.
No, they weren't. And that is fairly new. 1947, it took the moniker of India. And this is all part of their conferences, the Bangang, as they were trying to shape the world to this new view. They had to take India away. But if you go back and you look at any of the maps from the 14 through the 1640s, you will find America, Siva, India, Nova on maps. What that translates to is America, India, Great Superior. And that's on the maps from the 14 through the early 1600s. I have copies of that map.
Well, you're talking about receipts now. I mean, these receipts that you're bringing, especially in your book, and all the other information that you're bringing here tonight is amazing. And, you know, this is the reason why I say, you know, when you talk about war, these war drums were going on for a very long time against our people in many different fashions. When I say our people, the American Indian, the actual Amerindian, the actual Aboriginal American Indian, indigenous people of the land of all of the Americas. And it's going on well on into this day. And as a parting voice, is there anything else? Again, this is just part one. This is just part one. There is so much more that we have to get into in this book, including in the second book that he wrote. And what is the other book that you wrote?
The second book's title is "I Told You Don't Call My Dummy No Dummy." So I'm emphatic now when I wrote the second book.
And that second book goes into what I call the wars, the documented wars they call riots and all that other type stuff that happened here in the Americas. And don't think, you know, when people up there in Canada or the people down there in Mexico or Central America or even South America that you guys got away with anything, because there's a lot of people down there that are called Afro-Indigenous. And if you're Afro-Indigenous with non-ether hair, you are part of the people that were denigrated to the point as to where they wanted to wipe you off the face of the earth as well.
Yep, that is the truth. That is the truth. And which is the saddest part of it, because there is no documented boats going to Mexico during their slave trade, except for what came from the galleon from the Philippines, the Manila galleon. All of those boats went to Mexico were Asian in descent, not African. So the only immigrants brought to Mexico that were there were Asian phenotypical people. Those woolly Afro are the Mayan descendants left, remnants of the Olmecs who did not leave Mexico and moved north into North America, what we call North America, America itself today.
Unbelievable. Well, I appreciate you, and hopefully we can get you on again very, very soon, and we'll be having this conversation once again. It's just I get, sometimes I get really choked up because people don't understand when we're talking about this. We're really talking about a lot of lives, our own family members, that have been decimated off the face of the planet.
Exactly.
And it goes into the millions, not just hundreds of thousands, but millions. And again, I appreciate you so much for being here.
I appreciate you, but you remember this trip that we're on here today. We asked to be here, so those souls are recycled. We come back. We're like baby kids. We come back and try to fix what's broken.
And I'm gonna leave it there. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you, Akeem.
Yeah, have a great evening. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye.
And there you have it, everyone. This is Dark Matter Radio with your host, Ronnie McLean. That was Jameel Shamsid Deen, and it was a phenomenal conversation. And we'll have it again. Mahalo, everyone. Take care, and have a great night.